Houston Rockets fans were left shocked and confused when their points guard, Kevin Porter Jr., left the game halfway through it. On New Year's Day, the Rockets played against the Denver Nuggets when Porter decided he had had enough and took off. Today, we're bringing you all the news about this bizarre temper tantrum, plus the latest events in the world of the NBA. So firstly, what on earth happened in the Houston Rockets versus Denver Nuggets game? According to sources, the drama went down at halftime. Assistant coach John Lucas called Porter and his teammate Christian Wood into the locker room. He was not in a good mood. The longtime NBA assistant coach gave the two players a grilling over their disappointing performance in the first half. The athletes did not take the criticism well, and the three ended up in a massive argument, described by the head coach of the Houston Rockets, Stephen Silas, as a spirited debate. Well, that spirited debate turned from a verbal confrontation to a physical one, and more than one witness has reported that Kevin Porter Jr. ended up throwing a nearby object at John Lucas and had to be physically kept from him. We don't know what the object was that he threw at his assistant coach, but Lucas was not injured. What happened after the argument? Well, it was anticlimactic in terms of more conflict, but very exciting in terms of off-court drama. The coach, Silas, told waiting audiences that the angry athlete was questionable to return due to an injury to his left thigh. However, this was not the case. It turns out that actually Kevin Porter Jr. had been so offended by Lucas's criticisms that he had not only abstained from the court and the bench, but he got in his car and drove himself out of the Toyota Center completely. We don't know where he went, but some fans think he just went home out of anger and sulked for the rest of the night. How come the Rockets said that he had a thigh injury? At the time, the team as a whole was probably embarrassed that one of their players got so angry and that they left mid-game. Recently, Porter has had a real problem with his left leg, so it was a believable story. In the weeks leading up to the game against the Denver Nuggets, Porter had actually missed multiple games due to this thigh injury. However, people were skeptical, and the witness reports that came out later confirmed people's thoughts about what happened. What about Christian Wood? Houston Rockets center power forward Christian Wood didn't leave with Porter, nor did he launch any projectiles at staff members. He did, however, take a seat out for the rest of the game. As a matter of fact, he did not play all the way through for the first half either, as he got called off the bench. This was for skipping a compulsory COVID-19 test, which probably did not help coach's mood with him. As reported for The Atlantic, Christian Wood refused to sub into the game after Lucas called him out. Oh, that's awkward. Have either of the players received any punishments for their behavior? A few days after the game against the Denver Nuggets, the Houston Rockets played against the Philadelphia 76ers, and nobody was surprised when neither Kevin Porter Jr. nor Christian Wood were on the court during the game. Both players were suspended from joining the game, which hopefully has shown them that despite their talents, the team can and will go on without them. Both players are undoubtedly very good, but it does seem as though their skill has made some arrogance go to their heads. We can only hope that if they want their careers to continue, they will start being a little more sensible and less compulsive. Is this the first time that these players have been in trouble? No, it's definitely not the first time. Both players have reputations that are completely separate from their talents, and neither of them are good. What is Christian Wood's problem? Wood's reputation is based on his famous immaturity. He was incredibly good at basketball in school, and because he spent a lot of his youth being the best, he naturally assumed that he was the best out of everyone. He was completely full of himself. He couldn't be bothered to show up to meetings on time, skipped training sessions, and is even reported to have not brought his report with him to the airport when the team took a trip to Toronto. He's also known for being incredibly materialistic, as when he began to climb the ladder, he got himself a minimum contract. Other NBA teams gave him criticism for buying himself a Bentley. He has also been in trouble for being publicly drunk. When he was in Boston, he was filmed by members of the public literally staggering through the streets. People, of course, were staring at him, and this made Wood angry, and he argued with some of them. It didn't make him look any better, and his reputation got even worse. Wood might be settled on the Houston Rockets now, but he has a long history of being passed from team to team because he's so difficult to work with. It seems from his performance on New Year's Day that he's finding his immaturity hard to grow out of. Kevin Porter Jr. has had more than one issue in the past too, right? Oh, you're kidding. Porter has a reputation for being a bit on the crazy side from his time playing for Cleveland before he was moved over to the Houston Rockets. Like Christian Woods, Kevin Porter Jr. is definitely talented, and nobody can deny that he definitely has skill on the court. However, he is so difficult to work with and has such a tendency for violent outbursts, the fans and other players alike look at him with caution, and you can't blame them. When he started playing with the Cleveland Cavaliers, Kevin Porter Jr. actually took a hit on his rookie contract amount. This is not a common practice, as rookie contracts are nowhere near as high as seasoned players' contracts in the first place, but the management must have already had concerns about it. Their instincts were right, as not long after he was signed, he got suspended. In a game against the Mavericks, Porter Jr. ended up on the bad end of a call he didn't like. Instead of dealing with it like a grown adult as he made his way off court, he decided to shove the referee with his shoulder as he passed him. It was incredibly obvious that this was on purpose, that the league suspended him without pay for one game for improperly making contact with the game official. He's also proven to be disorganized, as Porter Jr. actually forgot to wear his jersey to a game against Celtics. There obviously wasn't time for him to go and get it before the game started, so the Cavaliers started with another player instead of him. Didn't he also get arrested at the end of 2022? He sure did. He was pulled over by the Ohio State Highway Patrol and arrested on a firearms charge. In that particular county, it is illegal to keep a loaded firearm in your car. Kevin Porter Jr. was found to have done exactly that and was taken into custody for improperly handling firearms in a motor vehicle and transporting a loaded firearm in a motor vehicle accessible to the operator or any passenger without leaving the vehicle. The charges were later dropped, but it left a permanent stain on his already muddy reputation. Another well-known incident that happened while he was with the Cleveland Cavaliers is an argument he had in a locker room with management. He was angry at his locker being moved, so he started yelling and actually throwing food. The noise attracted the general manager of the team, Kobe Altman, and Porter Jr. actually kept this up in front of him. He shouted at Altman too, and at one point he even called his manager a slave owner. It was at this point that Cleveland realized that they couldn't fix him, and he was traded off to the Houston Rockets. How has his behavior been since he joined the Rockets? Honestly, it's not been that great. In spring of last year, Porter Jr. got in trouble for an incident at a strip club in Miami. His teammate, Sterling Brown, apparently got jumped by some of the other guests, and Porter Jr. joined in to help him. According to reports, he was roughed up a bit, but wasn't badly injured, and he actually played in a game on the following Monday night. However, this wasn't the end of his trouble that evening. This is because, in being at the club in the first place, Porter Jr. was actually violating the coronavirus rules that the team had in place. The NBA had rules at the time that prevented social gatherings of 15 or more people entering bars, lounges, clubs, or similar establishments. And by being present at the strip club, Porter Jr. was breaking this rule. For violating the health and safety protocol, Kevin Porter Jr. was fined $50,000. It goes without saying that both of these athletes are extremely talented. Kevin Porter Jr. in particular has scored a ton of points over both of the teams that he's played for. It's a shame that neither of them can seem to understand that their behavior off the court is just as important as how many points they score while they're on it. Thanks for watching today's video, guys. See you next time.